Ja siirrymme ohjelmassa vähän Suomen rajojen ulkopuolelle, että saadaan kansainvälistä tuulahdustakin ohjelmaamme. We will also switch our language into English as we will hear Diego Luna Quintanilla, who is an architect and an urban planner working at Sweco in Belgium. Diego has been working with Sweco's thought leadership work called Urban Insight and dived into best practices around Europe regarding regenerative urban development. Next, Diego will talk about urban green as a driver for regenerative development. And Diego is not here in Vallila, Helsinki. He will speak through Teams, so we will switch to Diego's presentation next. Go ahead, Diego.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation and for the invitation. I hope that you can hear me all well. Yeah. So indeed, I'm going to talk today about the role of urban green within the whole concept of regenerative development. I will switch to my presentation. Just give me a second. And here I am. So can you please confirm that everything's on screen, please? Yeah, I guess so. So I start then. So indeed, I was in the last for the last 2 years until January. I was leading together with other colleagues the initiative of Sweco Group called Urban Insight. So it's our knowledge development platform, and it was focused on the topic of resilient societies. So within this mission of 2 years, we created a lot of material, articles and reports. And the focus of today's presentation, it is on one report that we published in December last year, which is called Regenerative Neighborhoods Where People and Nature Flourish. This was co-written with my colleagues Tobias, Lisbeth, Ragnar, and myself, with the help with many experts from all over the Sweco countries. It was a very interesting production because for the first time we were trying to put together a lot of disciplines within Sweco to talk and to discuss about the topic of regenerative development, which is, let's say, a notion that is getting some traction within our field of work. But why we decided to deal with regenerative development as a concept, it is because actually when we're looking at the different crises that we're living, we see that ecosystem collapse, it is one of the most pressing crises that we have. So when you look at the current state of ecosystems in the world, you see that there are over 39 or 40 countries that has very fragile states of their ecosystems. But also when you look at the importance of ecosystems in our daily life, in our business, in our human development in general, we see, for instance, one of the statistics that pop up from different studies, it is that 55% of the global GDP, so all the economic activities that we do, they are highly depending on functioning ecosystems. So it is something that it is totally intertwined with our social and our human life, but it's also linked to other things. So when you look at the bigger picture, this is a scheme coming from the World Economic Forum. So they update it every year. So probably this year's scheme, it is a bit different. But anyways, it shows the whole picture of how the different crises that we can see from different fields, geopolitical, environmental, societal, economical, or technological, they're all interlinked. So, which means that we cannot respond to one crisis without looking at other crises that are part of the problem, but also we cannot think about solutions that will not have impact on other things. So it's actually an interconnected network or complex network of crises, which means that everything we do to solve or to address one of these crises can never be done in isolation. We always need to think about a systemic approach in which the planning of cities that we do, the planning of projects or built environment, it should be looked in a holistic way, in a multidisciplinary way. We cannot think about only developing a neighborhood based on the social dynamics. We need to think about the environmental dynamics. We need to think about the waste streams. We need to think about the energy, about the water, all together. And that's what's composing of our built environment. So that's one thing. We need to look in an integrated way, in a systemic way. But another thing is that we need to provide the support our society needs to change their behavior. Everything is part of a bigger societal transition, and we need to, as a society, be able to change our behavior. But we cannot not do that alone as well. We need to work together, and actually our built environment needs to support this societal change. So we need to upgrade, and we need to reinvent, and we need to regenerate the spaces of daily life so they can be able to support these wider transitions. We need to be able to create new type of urban facilities that will help us, for example, growing our food in our neighborhoods, or creating productive devices so we can be part of a wider circular transition. We need spaces for social interaction, for capacity building, and so on. And that's why the holistic view is very important, that we are able to not to work in silos, but to work in a larger picture. And for that, we also need consensus on this. So there are certain frameworks, global frameworks, that help actually to look at things in an integrated way. The One Health approach is, for instance, one framework in which sees the human health, the environmental health, and the animal health as being one health, so one approach. So these type of references help actually for us to be able to look at the whole picture. But also that links to the whole idea of what's regenerative development. So in general, this approach, or the regenerative design approach, views cities not in isolation, but as part of a larger ecological whole. And in that sense, a regenerative neighborhood, for instance, in regenerative neighborhoods, natural and social systems, they are integrated as equal partners. So the concept of regenerative development encourages cities to move beyond being only neutral to actively regenerating natural systems and enhancing human well-being. So when we look at the transition, actually a lot of things that we do within sustainable development in general, they are part of this wider transition. But we also need to understand what's the impact and what's the role of the things and the projects we do within this wider transition. So we're talking actually from a path that we go from doing less damage to actually give back to our environment, and that has several stages. So we have the conventional design, is basically the design that has little or no consideration on the impact into the environment. We have greener design, which are those projects that have an interest of creating less impact. However, they are not changing fundamentally the way they are developed. They are not changing any models. They are just trying to minimize the impact, but still within the conventional kind of way of doing projects. We have a neutral design, or a sustainable design, let's say, which is the one that do its best to cause no harm, no impact at all, so zero impact on the environment. That's, of course, very interesting, but it is not actually the holy grail. It's not what we should be aiming for, because we have destroyed so much already within our human history that to have neutral impact is not enough. We actually need to go beyond that. We need to start to restore the ecosystems and the capacities of the ecosystems. And we also need to go even one step further and thinking about the development of society and nature as one system that works together. That will be then the regenerative design. And this is something that is kind of happening already within the context in which we work. So policies and environmental agendas are slowly pushing into that direction. The most recent policy that came up last year is an EU nature restoration law that fixed some targets for Europe to be able to restore ecosystems in many ways. And this is kind of the context in which we should be considering our projects, and that will create also a lot of opportunities within our current practice. So within the study that I was telling you before, we wanted to check, okay, what's the current state? If we want to achieve this regenerative development, if we want to implement the nature restoration law, we need to understand where we are now sitting as European cities. What's the current state of the urban green blue, and how can that help? So we realize actually that Europe, in terms of statistics, it is projected to grow in terms of population until next year, actually, 2026. That will be statistically the peak. And then the population will slowly decrease in the next upcoming 25 years. However, when you look at the trends in distribution of population, even though the population will decrease, a lot of people will start moving to cities. So actually the cities will keep on growing. So the question is, how can we keep on growing, or how can we face that challenge without compromising our open spaces and our urban ecosystems? So that's where we want to see the urban green spaces not as spaces to be filled up with urbanization, but actually as the drivers for urbanization. So in the past, or in the current present, we are also looking at infrastructure like for cars or public transport infrastructure as the drivers for development. We need to actually go one step further and try to look at ecosystems as those drivers for developments, and think of cities built to reinforce ecosystems. That's where we did this analysis actually on the 22 European cities to understand the potential they still have to increase the green-blue areas. This was done doing some European data sets. It's a Copernicus database from the European Union. There we took from these 22 European cities, we took only the land use classes that are considered already urbanized. So we excluded from the analysis everything that is already considered green or open, like agricultural land, parks, water bodies, and we concentrated only on roads, urban fabric, industrial fabric, public and commercial zones, sport facilities, railways, airports, and ports. So we try to look at all these urbanized areas and measure what's the degree or what's the current state of green within that built environment. And once we looked at the current state, we also did some analysis on how statistically this built area could increase their amount of green. And that's what you see here in this graph. On the light brown, it is the current state, so the amount of green within the built environment per city. And in green is the amount of green that we could increase actually within that. So it is still a statistical approach. It is about potentials, but just to understand the impact of this, we try to summarize all this increased green into some figures. And that's what you get here on the right. So the most important figure actually, it is to understand that all these 22 cities combined, they can integrate within its built environment around 56,000 extra hectares of green. So that's equivalent, let's say, to 7 times the Port of Rotterdam, or 400 times the Hyde Park in London, or 500 times the center of Tallinn. When we look at the different land uses, so industrial, roads, etc., we also see that industrial land has the most potential to increase their green within the industrial land without compromising the productive capacity also of this industrial land. So there we see, on one hand, the enormous potential that cities still have to include green, but also which type of zones they still have indeed more potential to incorporate more green. Some numbers to have an idea. So these 56,000 hectares are equivalent, let's say, So considering this, we can increase from 23% to 50% of neighborhoods that has at least 30% covered in green, which is what is recommended by the World Health Organization. There is also another interesting figure. It is that this amount of green can, for instance, buffer 160 million cubic meters of water. It can also create 200% more improvement of urban habitat for biodiversity. So in general, the increase of green in urban environments creates a lot of benefits. This is something that is also summarized in another report we published in Urban Insight last year, From Grey to Green, which is about nature-based solutions. There we see that increasing green, it is good for social cohesion. It is good for the water management, for carbon storage, to save energy, to reduce heat in cities is good for the biodiversity, of course, for mental and physical health, for air quality, but also it is good for the economy. It is good for making societies thrive. The question is, okay, we in this study, we saw the potential, but it's a statistical potential. Then the challenge is how to make it happen. It is not easy, actually, to transform something that is built in something that is unbuilt or green. However, there are certain types of urban operations that could help us actually to transform built environment into more green environment. So if we look back at the nature restoration law, there is one specific target, target number 8, which is addressing specifically urban ecosystems. And there we have 3, let's say, sub-targets or 3 goals within the law. One, it is to have no net loss in the total urban green area. So we need to protect every green that we have in cities. The second target is to increase the amount of green. So we need to replace one thing for another. We need to replace sealed and built areas with green. And third is to increase the amount of trees, so the canopy cover of cities as well. How can we do it? There are many ways. I will show some examples from Brussels, also based on these 3 targets. So one way in which we can achieve this target is to consolidate and to upgrade the existing urban ecosystems. So here this is an example for Brussels. It is a vision that we have been working on for the whole region of Brussels. So here what you have on the left is a map of the Brussels capital region. Here we did, as part of the vision, we did a very extensive and detailed mapping of every single open space of Brussels. Not only the existing, but also the planned open spaces. So we made an archive of all the ongoing projects and future projects. We mapped them, but we also identified missing links with the idea to understand which will be the framework, the really open space framework that will guide development in Brussels. There we were able to configure different ecological corridors that goes from the outskirts of the city towards the center. We did it extensively for the north, and then last year we did it also for the south. And as part of this project, so we had the visioning on the, let's say, more top-down scale, regional scale, but we also had the mission to create a support center or a platform for implementation in which different actors, private or public actors, for instance, local municipalities, they could come to us if they have a project, if they see an opportunity of a project that could fit within the whole vision. So we can give support in terms of the project development, but also supporting the dialogues with different actors. You need to create a lot of partnerships to be able to implement this kind of projects. And we also gave support in knowledge about landscape ecological features and capacity building also to make it happen. So we need actually for these ambitions of regeneration and restoration, we need to work always from the top down in a way that we are able to have clear plans, but also to be able to support implementation from the bottom. Another way in which we can increase the green in our cities, it is by thinking about optimizing the way we move within the city. So by having a modal shift and to balance the infrastructure that's given for cars with the infrastructure that is needed by pedestrians and bikes, we can actually recuperate a lot of sealed surface that can then become green. So this project, for example, is again a regional project. It's from the Mobility Agency of the Brussels Capital Region. They commission us to create a vision on how can they demineralize as much as possible their regional roads. So we created again a wider vision on the Brussels scale. But we also thought about which are the design principles that could make it happen in reality, and which are the design tools that we have in our hand to create this demineralization. And we also have some pilot projects. So they were identifying some opportunities, and they were giving us these projects ad hoc in a way that we could test already with real budgets and with real places. How can this happen in reality? In parallel, also the region, with our support, they launched a bottom-up initiative to incorporate also citizens within this whole reflection. So they made a call for projects in which citizens could postulate or could send ideas about how can they demineralize or make it more green their local streets or their streets where they live and they have their daily life. That was a very interesting project with a lot of inputs and a lot of participation. So like that, people also start to embrace and to engage within this whole trend from the bottom. Another way, a third way in which we can increase green within the cities is by incorporating green in buildings. There is a lot of opportunities with all the buildings built, especially big buildings, big office buildings, for example, commercial buildings that were built in the 70s, 80s, that today they are really in need for renovation because they need to upgrade all their techniques and maybe think about new programs. So this is an opportunity to incorporate also a green within the buildings. This example over here is a proposal we did for the reconversion of twin towers in Brussels. It's about making these monolithic buildings into mixed use, one tower to be transformed into housing, the other one into offices, but especially integrating green everywhere in the building in many levels, not only to increase their kind of scenic quality, but also as a technical device for regulate temperature and also catch and manage rainwater. So this is one example, but actually this building is situated in a zone. So this is the northern quarter of Brussels. The building that I showed you is over here. So as you see, there are many buildings like those. And this is actually a trend that could be replicated everywhere. So this project that we're doing is more the planning of the whole district. In this planning project, we identified transformation areas that are today maybe in need of renovation, but are also very heterogeneous and with a lot of different volumes colliding one with each other. The idea is that by working with carefully in the renovation of these different sectors and putting landscape and including green as an important part of the design, we will be able to configure a network and a armature or a framework for the whole neighborhood that will help increasing its quality and environmental performance. In parallel, many initiatives are happening in the same neighborhood, knowing that this is a neighborhood in transformation. So buildings are transforming, but also the people are trying to get aware of what is happening. And a lot of initiatives are being popping up by creating panel discussions on the streets, but also some other neighborhood activities, placemaking activities that help that this transition of these places be not only done from the real estate market or from the government, but also by the people and residents living and using these spaces. Last but not least, another important way in which we can integrate green in cities is by having big renovation plans. That happens quite often. It's quite a trend to renovate, for instance, old industrial sites within the cities. In Brussels, this is all, of course, a trend, but it's also a challenge because we don't want to gentrify industrial areas. We want to make the industrial areas still productive. However, we understand that they also have the capacity to integrate other functions, so productive functions, but also housing. There is a big housing demand that's possible in a certain way, but also green and water features. So here is the example of one area in the center of Brussels that it is It is an industrial area, but it is not the most performant industrial area. Let's say it is half abandoned and still in transformation. Here, our plan it is to make it a place that is able to link the two neighborhoods on the left and on the right, which are vulnerable neighborhoods, let's say, and try to integrate them through a network of public spaces and green spaces, but also by creating some mixity and some critical mass of residents living, working, and having also neighborhood facilities within the spaces. And this is, again, something that takes a lot of time to deal with, especially with planning. The planning processes take a lot of time. But in the meantime, there have been also some appropriations by citizens, by organizations, by different actors of those industrial spaces to start slowly to create community. So there is the activation of one of the heritage industrial buildings with some cultural activities and co-working spaces. There has been this very successful temporary project for a pool that lasted, I think, for 5 years. This summer is the last summer of this temporary pool along the canal. But there have been other projects popping up around the neighborhood. So again, the appropriation of citizens is fundamental for it. So to conclude my presentation, here I would like to sum up actually which are the challenges, the barriers, and the enablers to shift to setting this regenerative agenda. On one hand, it's not a difficult task. It is a difficult task, sorry. It is not easy to implement those projects, and here are some of the challenges that we have seen within these projects. On one hand, the complexity and non-linearity. So a shift in the system thinking requires moving beyond narrow linear problem solving and to understand the world as a complex interconnected ecology. That's something that I was stating quite strongly in the beginning of my presentation. To adopt a planet-centric approach, so prioritizing the health of the planet and ecosystem rather than the only human prosperity. That's something that has to be done equally in a well-balanced. Community engagement is always difficult, especially in places that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Climate change makes things even more difficult. To transition to a sustainable resource management also requires significant policy changes, investments, and shifts in the behavior. Transdisciplinary cooperation, it is also a challenge. We need to work very strongly on creating ways in which we can facilitate cooperation. The weakness of our sometimes our legal framework or political framework also doesn't allow us to go as fast as it's required for us to go. Short-term economic interest.
Diego, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are running over time, so I was wondering if we could wrap up. I'm so sorry.
No problem. That's my last slide is
Great,
the
thank you
following
very
slide.
much.
So for shifting to challenges to barriers, here are some opportunities. So on one hand, funding remains a major lever. Empowering communities, it is also something that will deblock a lot of problems and guarantee that the success of certain implementation. Communication and education, so good storytelling, public awareness, and cross-border cooperation, it is needed. We need strong leadership, but also we need the commitment from the private sector. So we are able to work together in implementing all these different initiatives. And thank you very much for your time and your attention, and sorry to be over time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any further questions. Thank you.